Good evening. Well, welcome everyone. I wonder if, I don't know about all of you, but I've been feeling a little sleepy in the rain. And I got tricked into this feeling of vast summery expanse for a couple of weeks. And now we're back to the spring womb of Eugene. So, I don't know, I hope everyone's enjoying it. It seems like our world needs the water. So we have a few people who are just joining us tonight, and I was thinking to go through sort of a whirlwind orientation, sort of what we covered last class, but really there's not much to talk about. Basically, we have a book, that's probably important information, that if you want to read along, it'll provide a lot of further material and insights and kind of flesh on what we're able to talk about in this very short class period together. So it's called The Six Perfections by Dale Wright. And the more I'm reading, so I'm reading in this book to prepare for the class, the more I'm reading in here, the more I'm really appreciating what David has to offer. And in particular, I like the first section of what he does in talking about each of the perfections. He's really talking about the traditional Buddhist offering and teaching about each of these qualities of awakening. And he's tying in all these sources and different original texts to sort of make his narrative and case. And really doing a great job, I think, of churning in the mythology of Buddhist practice, which really makes me excited. And then he does this thing which I think many people appreciate, which is, I think he titles the section A Contemporary Critique. So he basically puts on more of a modern lens for each of these qualities and discusses sort of their drawbacks and difficulties that you might see from a more modern perspective. So many people might enjoy that. So I highly recommend the book. We have I think we have one or two more copies available for checkout in our library. I bought a couple books a week ago, and then I think 2 available for purchase right now. So if you're inspired, let me know and I can point you in that direction.
What's the name of the book?
It's Six Perfections, The Six Perfections. It's quite available online, so easy to track down. And then it's by Dale Wright. If someone's writing that down online. Besides that, I mean, we have 6 classes together, so this is the second out of 6, and we're going to be spending some time together. I'll be lecturing probably most every class about this or that, and then we'll have time for discussion is my hope and dream every class. We might not always get there, and then we'll have more or less permeable lectures too. So sometimes I'll be like, okay, I'm really trying to get from A to B, maybe clarifying comments and questions only. And other times I'll be like, oh, really bring it on, your questions and tangents, and let's wrestle with some things. So I'll be pretty forthright about kind of what the shape of the lecture is. Any other questions about nuts and bolts kinds of things? Onryu?
So what led you to choose this text, this book, to kind of go off of for this? Just kind of curious.
I think it's the only one I know of. It's one that I think Genjo really likes, and so it always comes up when we're talking about the perfections. Though I just learned that what's his name? There's another book about the 6 perfections, and I think he calls it Imagining a Better World, and he's really involving the imagination, which I just ordered it today. Gosh, who is it? Norman Fisher, there it is. If anyone knows of Norman Fisher, a teacher in California. He's also a poet and is inspired by the imagination, which sort of jives with my inspiration right now, so I'm excited to see what he's done with that book. This I think definitely has a stronger, it has more historical roots for these teachings, and then also the modern analytical perspective, which I'm guessing Norman Fisher's is the exact opposite, like very dispensing with lots of that and saying, okay, how does this work in your belly? How does this move through your heart and mind, and give you more images of how to enact like a beautiful life. So yeah, I'm curious to see them next to each other.
You think, well, how much do you think a day, like a couple chapters a day? I ended up getting the book, so I was thinking.
This one?
Yeah, the Dale, right?
Yeah. I think there are only 6 or 7 chapters in the whole thing, so they're fairly long and a little bit dense. And in fact, for this particular class, one of the pieces of homework I'm going to give is I'm going to actually photocopy the wisdom section, the first part of the wisdom section, and send that out to everyone to read. And it's a little bit longer for the homework that I usually give, so it'll be optional. So I don't know, as you feel paced, probably 1 chapter per week. I mean, 1 chapter per week would pretty much get you through to the end of the book. But it's good to start with wisdom. We'll talk about wisdom has a particular salience for all of these perfections and how they are taught and why they matter and lead to awakening in a Buddhist sense. So, yeah. Okay. Well, thank you to everyone who emailed me. Oh, the homework that I assigned. So also for those of you who are first coming, I'll give some homework. And one of the ideas there is we're only meeting for an hour and 10 minutes every week. And so homework's a way for us to be churning on something together and then come ready, having digested something to share and be sort of primed together. So, and I also tend to send out many of the sources that I found interesting in preparing that week's lecture. So if you do have the time and the inspiration to go further, you're totally welcome to explore extra materials. So that's not required at all. So I'll give you much more than you probably want. So that's up to you to investigate further. So homework last week, I asked people to send just a quick paragraph or so about what's inspiring in your world and practice right now. And out of these 6 perfections, these teachings of the awakened heart and mind, which one's really striking you in the gut, either in a way that you're attracted to it and you're like, yes, my life is really like, the energies are pouring here, or in a way that might be quite repulsive to you, like, ugh, generosity. I'm always told to be generous and to give more, and it's never enough, and I'm just really tired of it. So however that landed for you, we got a really interesting spread. There's a clear winner of one that was most inspiring to people. Does anyone have a guess what it is? One out there. Well, out of 11 people who responded, 5 people were saying patience is one that's really inspiring for them right now. And 2 for generosity, 1 for ethics, 2 for vigor, and 1 for concentration, and 0 for wisdom, poor wisdom. Which is conspicuous, and I think it's actually not uncommon, because wisdom is definitely the most slippery out of all of these, and we'll spend some time sort of investigating why that is tonight. Yeah, patience. Well, my thought for how to spend the class time tonight is I think we'll have lots of juicy discussion after I give a short lecture. So I'm leaning towards just jumping right in. And I thought, since we have a few people who are just joining up tonight, I'd start with a quick recap of what I covered last week. So this word perfection, kind of an intense word. And the idea of these 6 perfections are a path of practice. Many people have probably heard of the Eightfold Noble Path, the Noble Eightfold Path. That's a really traditional way, the earliest way to talk about path in Buddhism and what it means to open up and awaken life. And as Buddhism changed and shifted and moved through different cultures, different formations of that path sprung up and became active and alive in people's imagination and practice. And the one that's flowed through 2,500 years and morphed and gone through, mainly up out of India and into China and into Japan, are these 6 perfections. And this is what we've landed with as the most used and discussed way to talk about path here in this particular temple and lineage. And so that word paramita, it's a Sanskrit word, and it has a couple ways you can translate it, which are really important to talk about. And the first is you can combine the 2 kind of root words in there to mean something like chief, primary, or most excellent. And so that really quickly gives rise to that word perfection. So that's the most colloquial term we toss about in English when we're talking about paramita. And the second one, I think, is much more juicy. And you can find different root words in there, that combine, and they end up meaning something like that which goes beyond, or that which is beyond, that which is already on the other shore. So that's quite a different feeling, rather than, I think we can get kind of a static feeling from the word perfection in a way. That can be just kind of like a unassailable idea that has no en routes, no on-ramps to get there. But this, that which goes beyond and that which is already beyond, I think it gives a kind of really beautiful juxtaposition of, on one hand, being the goal itself of going beyond, and on the other hand, also being the vehicle of going beyond. And so in Buddhist terms, that goal is liberation, or nirvana, or awakening, or maybe in more colloquial times, a beautiful, vibrant human life. And then in terms of the vehicle, or the means to achieve that goal, we would talk about that as path. So this second term of the second way to translate paramita, turning into that which goes beyond, that which is beyond, liberation and path. So all kind of wrapped up in one. I think that's quite juicy. And so these teachings come from a really large body of literature that's been cultivated over thousands of years for creating this path that we're talking about. What does it mean to unfold the Buddha's wisdom in this very lifetime? What are the kinds of encouragement and guidance that we can glean from these sorts of teachings? In the body of literature, it's quite interesting. There are very small versions of this teaching, and there are very, very large versions of the teaching. So the shortest version, almost the shortest version, apparently the shortest version is actually just one syllable, which is ah, and I think it means something like praise. Hallelujah, the Buddhist hallelujah. And then the other shortest one is gate, gate, paragate, parasamgate, bodhisvaha. Gone beyond, gone totally, utterly beyond, hail awakening. And for those of you who have practiced here on Sundays, that's the last part of something we chant every Sunday, the Heart of Great Perfect Wisdom Sutra. So I won't go into too much about that specific teaching right now, but if you can start applying that I as we're chanting that on Sunday, be like, oh, okay, this is about the whole body of the prajna paramita, the perfection of wisdom, and this sutra is inviting us into that. I think that it can be it's quite esoteric in many ways. I sometimes get a little worried when I'll bring a friend here and be like, my community is great, come check it out. And then we all sit and get pretty serious and chant, no eye, no ear, no body, no tongue, no toes, not no toes, no nose, maybe no toes as well, no toes, no mind. And it sounds quite intense and esoteric, and there's a lot of very specific teaching in there about what that's pointing our hearts to in terms of awakening. So we'll sort of bracket that conversation for now. And so the real kind of juicy and living question for us is, how can this be helpful to us? And where are the immediate places that we're being pointed? And so if we look at these 6 perfections, I think for everyone online, I've emailed this to you. I think it might be really useful to have the little PDF I sent to everyone with all of it looks something like this. This was living on my wall for a couple weeks before teaching this class, getting them into my belly. So looking at these 6 qualities of practice, of awakening heart, the first level of really the teaching just says, do these things. Very straightforward. Cultivate a life that's filled with generosity. Cultivate patience. Cultivate a kind of energy. Make time to become concentrated and simple and straightforward. And maybe wisdom's not so, it's hard to say be wise. But maybe we can bring that energy and see if that opens something up for us. So in terms of these English translations come from a Sanskrit word. And so there are multiple translations that can give us further sides to unfold our inquiry with these terms. So starting with generosity, there aren't actually many more translations of this one. Generosity seems pretty spot on. Also of giving of oneself and just generally giving. And in virtue, morality, discipline, and proper conduct are other translations there. And I have all these written out for me all the time. I find that they can be very helpful to have in front of me to open something up that might be static otherwise. And in patience, I think this has some of the most juicy translations. Tolerance, forbearance, endurance, and acceptance. I really like that. To endure something. And vigor can translate into energy and effort and diligence. And concentration, we have absorption, I think is a really beautiful term, and contemplation. And wisdom, insight. And I also like the term intimacy. And so as we look at these terms, in one sense, there's sort of a list of things we should do. And also, I think the quality of a clean, burning, open, and vibrant life, that beings who are awake and energized and open to the world in a certain way, in a very healthy, flowing, responsive manner, are these people, these beings are exhibiting these qualities. And then further, as we receive and digest the very simple pointing to pay attention to these things and to do them, there's a beautiful dynamic, I think, that happens where you are immediately and very quickly thrown into your own inadequacy. That's sort of the gift it gives you, right? You say, all right, I'll be patient. How well does that really work? How well does that really pan out? Frankly, for me, it tends to show me the edges of where I'm not patient. And so in here, I think these teachings are always inviting us into a more profound exploration. That we're tossed directly into our failures, our stinginess, our weakness, our inability, and all of our limitations, right? Those become front and center. I think this is, for many of you who might be investigating meditation as a way to explore your heart and life and probably cultivate a lot of these qualities. I'm always ruthlessly shocked at how just clear of a mirror that is, that I'm sort of a mess, right? That it gives back to me all that I'm not aware of. And so rather than just being stuck in a place of thinking that this can be a game of getting the right hammer, the hammer of patience out, the hammer of virtue, we can think of these as pools or arenas of our being that underlie almost all of our activity in the world. And in terms of thinking about those, I imagine generosity as a place of exchange. How is it that we find things that are ours and things that are others? And how do we relate with that in the world? And that's something we're doing moment by moment by moment. In terms of virtue or morality, relationship is central to being a self. If you're a self, that means you're going to be in relationship to things. In terms of patience, this one I find really beautiful right now, encountering difficulty. That this place of patience is just calling our attention to that. Meeting difficulty is just going to be a central aspect of human life. And how do you do that? How does that flow for you? And vigor, that how is your energy flowing? Are things turned in and slow and sort of, like a weighted wet blanket on you, and do you move through the world in that way? Or is there a kind of spark of vibrancy? And how do our images of what energy really looks like? Can we actually be kind of tired and slow and easy, but not sort of in a place of turning off, right? Does that make sense? It's so easy for me when I start feeling like, the rain comes off, or rain starts coming down, I just sort of like start to turn off a little bit and go to sleep. But can there be slower, like you're downshifting a gear when you're driving stick shift, and keep a connection alive rather than just turning off? And in terms of concentration, really just our connection with things. And in one sense, so if we're talking about the cultivating connection, we can sit down in formal meditation practice and sort of hone something there. But also when we sit down in meditation practice, we realize that we're connected with something no matter what, right? Even if it's a crazy monkey mind, that crazy monkey mind is grabbing you in all these different ways, poking you, prodding you, throwing poop at you, whatever it is at that time, you have connection. And the sort of arena of concentration, as we enter that with some kind of reflection and sincerity, we're called deeper into that pool of our being. And in wisdom, this paramita, or prajna, is really pointing at the most foundational and important aspects of Buddhist teaching, which is the non-separation of all living. You will hear this term as a no self, right? That there's no fundamental abiding you that's separate from the world, but rather moment by moment, you're influencing the world and the world is influencing you, and there's no place you can really find a you that's separate, right? We'll spend time next class talking about wisdom a bit deeper, but this place of wisdom and prajna is pointing at that profound intimacy of life that in Buddhist teaching is just fundamental in understanding, in unlocking what liberation is really about. So when we enter these pools of being, not just from a place of thinking, oh, I can hammer it out, I can make it happen, we're invited into an energy that's more about paying attention. It's more about listening and becoming more subtle and intimate with these arenas of our being. And that in that place, I think, is a gift that Buddhism offers in terms of opening up what a liberated life can look like. It's not just getting all the tools and the techniques and getting a correct shape, but rather having a few tools to enter with some kind of courage and stability into these parts of our being that are quite mysterious and unfathomable. And so the paramitas, they lay out this path of cultivating human life and inviting you into the vibrant fullness of your life that's already here. So maybe any kind of clarifying questions in there? That was all recap from what we touched upon last week. It went a little bit faster than I did last time. Does anyone have any comments or anything else they'd like to share? Elizabeth?
It's just a comment of what you mentioned in regards to sometimes feeling down, but needing to keep the light. I experienced that last Sunday. I went to ride my bicycle, and I usually just, after I'm done, I just get in my car and go. And that morning, for some reason, I felt the need to go swing because I like the swings. So I did that. And as I came back, I had just met a lady 2 days before, and I saw somebody that I thought looked like her, and I asked her what her name was, and she said it was Cynthia, so it wasn't the same person. And there was some type of connection between us. We started talking like 2 sentences, and she said, "You have such a light." And I just started crying because I really needed to hear that and just remind myself of who I am. But it was very special to hear somebody else. And there were so many coincidences about her daughter's name was my name. And her husband was from Chihuahua, Mexico, which is where I'm from, and a lot of things. So I just thought that maybe that's, is that something that you're referring to on a way?
Oh, thanks for sharing, Elizabeth. I don't think I was referring to it in specifically that way. But no, it's okay. But I don't see it as necessarily so different. I think that in one sense, we can really be I mean, one of the joys of other people is we can have a kind of reflection from other people that we can't often muster ourselves. And I think that sometimes, a way I oftentimes will imagine practice is if I'm encountering, so let's say I'm feeling down throughout the day, and that's something in my world, there can be a way that I'm reminded of a certain kind of brightness through relationships with others. And then there's other times where maybe I can be feeling a kind of darkness, and I can decide to center on that, like kind of in my own gut and my own belly, and not really look outside for anything. And I can almost it almost feels like I tumble through it. And then I see a snail, or I see my cat. It's often animals, it's not often people. I don't know why that is. But for me, a flower, something that's just like, wow, the world's calling to me in a way that's beyond my simplistic narratives of my world. And that doesn't always happen. Sometimes the darkness is very full, and there's not much it seems like I can do to move it. But other times there's something that feels very central in my own mind and heart that I can move past. Yeah.
Thank you for explaining it.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe I'll go ahead and introduce the material that I want to talk about today. And so maybe I'll apologize beforehand. This is how my mind works. So you might find this tremendously helpful or incredibly confusing. How does that show up, Junichi, on the... Great. So here on the bottom, I think this is pretty clear, but it has the Sanskrit word sort of marked as a 1, and generosity is 1. And this is the order they're traditionally put out in. So I really get a lot out of imagining diagrams and movements and things and relationships, and I put like a big arrow and I color it in, and that makes it go, ooh, yeah, I feel that. So I'll just talk a little bit about what this means to me, this little diagram, and what kind of points I think it makes and brings alive for me in terms of what are the interrelationships between these different qualities, and how can we observe them flowing and moving within us towards the goal of meeting the suffering of a human life and unfolding something more brilliant, something more meaningful. Well, I guess I don't want to say that suffering isn't meaningful, but unfolding a life that isn't just driven by greed, hate, and delusion, which are said to be the 3 poisons in Buddhism, that we have such an opportunity with a human life to do something else. So in one sense, one of the teachings with the paramitas is that there is a linearity to the game, that generosity is really said to be one of the first places we move from in cultivating an awakened heart. And in one way, it's a very beautiful, pragmatic thing. Find something that feels like yours and make it not yours anymore. Give it away. And when you start to do this, you loosen up the very tight sense of this is me, this is mine, this is the boundary of myself, and you are over there. That this is just the most easy, pragmatic way to start to chink some holes into that armor that we tend to build in ourselves in a very natural and simple way. And then further, moving on, ethics. In realizing that, in one sense, generosity can have a feeling of a little bit more objects, right? It's very easy to think, my pen, give it to Matthew. And in terms, kind of moving into ethics, sort of the opening and realization that actually all of my deeds are in one sense my possession. My energies that I move in the world are always in connection with other people. And so to learn how to pay attention to that and become aware that all of my decisions are always inevitably made in relationship with others. And when we start feeling into our relationship with others, it's very natural to feel frustrated by others. That we inevitably will have different viewpoints, and we will clash with other people's ideas of what is right and wrong, good, not good, and giving rise to the real necessity to have some kind of wherewithal to deal with the frustration of other living beings. I heard a story that at the head monastery of our school, this reporter in Japan was interviewing these 10 monks at Eiheiji, and they were all outside shoveling snow in winter, and they were all clearly freezing and made to sort of stand there and have this little interview. And they said, they asked each of the monks, they said, what's the most difficult thing about practice? And 9 of them said, other people. And one of them said, the cold. So monastic life does you a great favor by throwing you into that. We'll also sometimes affectionately call it potato practice. Apparently one way, I've never actually done this, one way to clean potatoes is a big cage that like turns. It's a big circular cage, and so you put all the dirty potatoes in there, put some water in there, and then you just turn the machine and it rubs them against each other, and then they become clean. So here, as we get into relationships, needing to cultivate an ability to deal with other people and deal with frustrations within other people, but actually I think this extends further into just general difficulties in life. How are you going to face difficulty? My linear narrative is breaking down. Well, we can go into there. I think it's impossible to be vigorous if you don't have some way to deal with difficulty. So for example, you get a hard task, and if you're always trying to find your way out of the difficulty, how are you going to harness energy to meet it? So in some sense, this patience gives rise to an ability to cultivate energy. And then in terms of, I think it's very easy to have a sense of those in our life without having religious practice or even religious leanings, that those dynamics are there in our life. But then in moving from vigor to concentration, this concentration is kind of a wild thing to sit quietly for 40 minutes. That it's not a common energetic gumption practice for people to do that, to sort of simplify the world as much as possible and to encounter mind. And this is probably the prize, I don't know if you want to call it technique or way to cultivate a certain kind of sensitivity and opening in the world within Buddhist practice. That this is the kind of crown jewel of saying that this is a place where something else in your life just, it's the only place we know that it can really happen. And without the balancing of patience and vigor in there, sort of opening energetic doors, it's very difficult to do this practice of concentration. It just, the mechanics of your heart, mind, body situation just don't hold together in the same way. And further, that concentration is the place in Buddhist practice and maybe other contemplative traditions say that that's a real gate for, say, exploring your devotion and connection with God. Or for here in Buddhist practice, talking about wisdom. And wisdom being very connected and synonymous with that teaching of no self, that teaching of impermanence, and realizing that this wisdom, it's so slippery to talk about, because in a sense it's not a thing, but rather this used to be a better looking arrow. This was a big arrow here that actually throws all of your energy back into everything else. Realizing that so often we want to, when we're doing a practice, we're cultivating certain kind of energies, we want that to lead somewhere that we can get and grasp. I got the wisdom, I got the juice, I got the good feeling, I have the understanding, and that can become, we want that to be static so badly, I think. Whereas in this tradition, that wisdom is pointing us right back into our own gut, moment by moment, meeting the world, meeting self and other, meeting our relationships, meeting our energy, meeting our difficult situations in life. So that's a way it all holds together in a kind of linear flow, which I was actually surprised it's so hard to do, because For me, one of the real places of beauty is thinking about these dyads, as I'm calling them. So the first two, the dana and sila, kshanti and virya, and dhyana and prajna. So you see these circles here? They have the arrow kind of showing that they're circling kind of within themselves. And for me, this is a place that really brings sort of life to these teachings. And further, they illuminate each other. I think they kind of need each other for us to see the whole picture of what they're about. So generosity and ethics, someone wrote in there, they were interested or I think actually bothered by generosity. I think I talked about it earlier that I'm just told I need to do more of it. I just need to give more. And further, many women in our culture are given more messages about what it means to be a good person as a woman. It means to just continually give, till there's nothing left. However, when you combine that kind of with ethics, we can see that actually holding boundaries, for example, becomes a great gift to everyone around you. That not only just pouring out kind of in a one-sided, simplistic way, but that, say, for example, when you hit your boundary, to be able to communicate that well with others in your relationships, that is a great gift to everyone else. That you're not just continually one-sided pouring out, but that you're feeling into your wholeness as a being, and then you're making an offering of that. So there's a teaching called the five faultless gifts. And I forgot to print this out. I was actually going to read you the entire teaching. But the first 5 precepts, the first 5 codes of the ethical conduct within Buddhism, they're framed as great gifts to all living beings. So when you refuse to take life, you give safety and security and kindness to all living beings, whether that's a fly or another human being or a plant. There's kind of an opening of generosity that happens when you uphold an upright ethical life. So in looking at patience and vigor, the willingness to take on difficulty and not run from it becomes, I think, the opening of a kind of vigor that's not just I'm going to get it done and I'm going to conquer this. But if the difficulty showing up as your life right in the moment then can become a gate of your exploration. So rather than maybe needing to feel like you have all your ducks in a row and that you're going to get something done, you can meet a challenge as an opportunity. And your life can, rather than having a mind that simply sees how everything can be done in a very clear way, my experience in exploring vigor is there's actually, for me, there's a buoyancy of mind that's possible. That I don't need to control or have everything figured out in a certain way or know the right way through. But even when something hits me as very opaque and very difficult, I can stay present and feel it as a kind of terrain and not something I need to either take out a hammer for or get away from. That becomes a kind of escape of our energies. And in Buddhist teaching, those are called the effluents or the outflows of mind. And so this is a place where we start to cultivate a different kind of energy where we're not moving through the world based on greed and hate. And if you could think about those in kind of fundamental energies, hate is pushing away, greed is getting close, pulling something near. But something that's stable and upright and just willing to encounter what is there and find that as the energy of your life. Not needing to spend so much energy pushing things around and pulling things near. That's kind of exhausting in so many ways when you live day to day with that energy. But when you don't need to run and you don't need to pull towards you, you can meet other people and you can meet difficulties in your life, the new kind of energy, I'd say. And further, I think that these guys do such a beautiful job of revealing the kind of near enemy of each other. So in my own life, I always thought I was quite a patient person, but I think more and more I'm starting to realize that I just am really good at turning off. I think I'm like, oh yeah, I'm listening to them speak and I'm really holding them, but actually I'm just sort of hitting an off switch in my being. And then when I find that I need to harness some kind of energy, I don't really have it. I feel kind of sloppy and lazy and just kind of like, But when I start to listen to people more, I'm finding that I'm feeling more angry. I'm being given the gift of my anger. And that's kind of frightening for me because I don't know, that's not been my image of what my character is about. I don't think of myself as a frustrated or someone prone to anger, but I'm also discovering that if I'm feeling those, I'm also invited into a kind of vibrancy and a kind of encounter where I'm not just kind of like putting a hazy, nice bubble around someone and holding them in that, but really listening to their words and letting them hit me and move through me. And of course that has some dangers to go along with there, but discovering how they really teach each other. And so I find that within these dyads, if you find that one of them feels off to you, you can sort of decide to look at the other one within that dyadic pair and see, okay, how am I holding that in my life? How is my patience when I'm trying to cultivate some kind of vigor, and watch how they talk and speak with each other. The other one, concentration and wisdom, that these two are just said to be vital for each other within the Buddhist path. That the only way to really discern kind of the very bedrocks of consciousness that we're moving through in mostly a pretty coarse way from day to day, the only way to really investigate those and pull up the roots of our delusion, so to speak, can only happen through concentration practice. And I don't know if I fully believe that, but part of me really does. That being willing to stop completely and rest my body and decide to give up a sort of conquering mind or any kind of attitude of action and just to meet the world without any sort of barrier. And my own, I guess not the world doesn't really work, but I'd say my own heart and mind. That in this place, I think, something quite profound can happen. I'm sort of betting my life on it here as a monk. And another important sort of relationship between all three of these is what I've labeled here is the level up. And thinking about these first three here, dana, sila, and kshanti, so generosity, ethics, and patience, that the point where more subtle practices appear is between patience and vigor. It's said to be in kind of the traditional teaching. And you can see how many, these are kind of, I would say a little bit outward facing. The generosity, ethics, and patience, their kind of focuses on outward actions and objects and sort of something coming to you from the outside. Whereas when we start talking about vigor, concentration, and wisdom, you can see there's kind of a flip to the internal, into the energetics of your being. So I think that's a really interesting place to watch for and look for in these, in working with these. And lastly, wisdom, which got a nice little fiery crown all around it. The whole teachings are often just referred to simply as the perfection of wisdom teachings. And that wisdom is really the unseen animating force behind and through all of these. So we've been talking about them, going through 1 through 6. And another way we can think about it is that wisdom is active the entire time, but sort of hidden within the depths of each one of these movements. So I want to read a couple of quotes that'll start to point us towards this wisdom and why and how it's so central. So this is within the 6 Perfections book by Dale Wright. The first 5 perfections are initially practiced at ordinary levels of understanding, then nurtured to the level of perfection when wisdom is applied to them. Therefore, The perfection of wisdom in 8,000 lines says, "For this perfection of wisdom directs the six perfections, guides, leads, instructs, and advises them, is their genitrix and nurse. Because if they are deprived of the perfection of wisdom, the first five perfections do not come under the concept of perfections, and they do not deserve to be called perfections. Wisdom is said to encompass all five of them." So really central. And this arrow here, you can see there are little arrows and there are big arrows. After wisdom, in one sense, is really the kind of honing of your vision. So a way, thinking about these guys, I sort of categorize these as doing, of generosity and ethics. They have this kind of quality of something you do. And moving into vigor and patience, a little bit something about how you are or how you do something, right? The sort of the backside energetics of how you're moving through the world. And then wisdom and concentration are about honing how you see the world. They're very much they're about transforming your vision of what things are, about what is appearing to you in the world through your human life. That this is the place where the most energy is placed throughout these huge pantheon of teachings. It's just like, what? How do we live this wisdom? How do we explore it? How do we allow it to further our exploration day after day, moment by moment? Let me read another teaching, and this will be a little bit longer. This is something we chant here every other day, and the title of this teaching is called Verses of Faith Mind. So many of you I've read a little bit esoteric teachings before in the class, so you can sort of sit back and not really search for grasping kind of understanding, of letting it rather kind of wash over you and feel into the poetics and sort of see what it hits and brings out. If the eyes do not close in sleep, all dreams will cease of themselves. If the mind does not discriminate, all dharmas are of one suchness. The essence of one suchness is profound. Unmoving, conditioned things are forgotten. Contemplate all dharmas as equal, and you return to things as they are. When the subject disappears, there can be no measuring or comparing. Stop activity, and there is no activity. When activity stops, there is no rest. Since two cannot be established, how can there be one? In the very ultimate, rules and standards do not exist. Develop a mind of equanimity, and all deeds are put to rest. Anxious doubts are completely cleared. Right faith is made upright. Nothing lingers behind, nothing can be remembered. Bright and empty, functioning naturally, the mind does not exert itself. It is not a place of thinking, difficult for reason and emotion to fathom. In the Dharma realm of true suchness, there is no other, no self. To accord with it is vitally important. Only refer to not two. In not two, all things are in unity, nothing is excluded. The wise throughout the 10 directions all enter this principle. This principle is neither hurried nor slow, one thought for 10,000 years. Abiding nowhere yet everywhere, the 10 directions are right before you. The smallest is the same as the largest in the realm where delusion is cut off. The largest is the same as the smallest. No boundaries are visible. Existence is precisely emptiness. Emptiness is precisely existence. If it is not like this, then you must not preserve it. One is everything. Everything is one. If you can be like this, why worry about not finishing? Faith and mind are not two. Non-duality is faith and mind. The path of words is cut off. There is no past, no future, no present. So you can feel how those words, that expression is really like grabbing your mind and twisting it and stretching it and opening it up and expanding it and shrinking it past the size you can ever imagine. And so it's quite difficult to talk about in words what's happening between that concentration and that wisdom. As you can see, I mean, that's a really honored teaching in our school, and you can feel how it resists the kind of intellectual grasping to say, oh yeah, I can hold it like this. But rather that exact twisting and stretching of our mind is what can happen through these kinds of concentration practices. And then what I think is quite beautiful there is it doesn't get to stop at that intellect or that expanding and just feeling kind of like a kind of general hazy oneness with all things. But really that wisdom just shoots us back with a finer touch upon all the other aspects of our life and asks us to engage with even more subtlety, even more attentiveness. So that's what I have to offer tonight. I'll open it up for conversation. We have about 15 minutes. Was it the diagram helpful for people? You can get like a thumbs all the way up, or like a medium.
So when we were talking about patience and vigor, I kept having this memory of riding my bike while it was snowing. Because there's this really fine line where you have just as much grip as you need, only if you apply the right amount of pressure. And so you can't let off because you lose it. So you have to have a certain amount of vigor there. But if you push too hard, you spin it out and you lose it. So you have to have the right amount of patience. And so you have to be right in that place where you're feeling what's happening. And sometimes you have to go with it, and sometimes you have to push into it. And it's this, I don't know, the balance between the two there. That felt a lot like riding your bike in the snow.
Yeah, I think that's a great image to put onto that. And I think one way this is also classically talked about is that before the Buddha woke up, someone was, I think, some musician of some kind, I think they were playing, a lutist, you might say, was like going down the river and playing a song, and he said, if the strings are too tight, they will break, but if they're too loose, they don't make a sound. So I think that image of how are we meeting the world moment by moment? Are we kind of clamping down in some way? We're like, oh, I just gotta get it done. I have these images and I'm forcing it.
Right.
Or with my patience, am I just kind of too loose and sort of like removed from the world a bit? But what is the balance of those energies, and how are they teaching each other? And maybe how are they not quite different things? Yeah.
I'm finding in practice of some of them, the inertia from that is kind of helping the other ones to take movement. Yeah.
Can you say more? What's one? Can you give an example?
Yeah, like I'm struggling a little with patience, as we talked about, and I found that the more, I lean into like generosity, or doing things for others, and that, like if I promise somebody to be somewhere to help them with something, then I practice ethics and actually show up codes and form. That should be there to help. And that kind of gives me that vigor to, get out of the house and to move, and, do other things. And that kind of propels into helping me with patience for the other situations. So,
Yeah.
and the stuff like that, just kind of the inertia of some of them are helping me, get the other ones into some motion.
Yeah. I think it's always so interesting where we can find ourselves being blocked. And one of the traditional images of the Buddha is as a medicine, a doctor, and like saying a Buddha or an awakened being can see other people and within their own self and beings, like where's the stuck point and how do you apply the proper kind of medicine of energy. And so within, I think our own being, the two places that I find that come quite often is realizing where I need compassion and realizing where I need to like chop through something a little bit and learning within myself when to use those or not, and being willing to make mistakes and kind of receive the feedback of that. Like for example, how easy it can be when we have a tendency to overextend ourselves and you just run yourself ragged. And even if you have to break your word sometimes, it's probably a good practice to lean into that sometimes and say, wow, I'm really sorry. I can't be there tonight. Like I've overextended myself. And how else are you going to learn to stop doing that unless you make a change somewhere, even if it feels difficult or unskillful at some point? I got mad at someone last night in a meeting. And I would think I was like 60% unskillful with sort of like bringing it up right then and there. But like looking within my temperament and how I tend to sort of always round things off or just be super accepting and not really avoid conflict, part of me is like, great, like you're getting in the game in a way that you've always been really afraid to. And that's always going to be messy. And so I think, learning how to get into the muck of it and make mistakes and receive the feedback of that is the way that we have to enter this game, in a sense.
I really love what you're saying about that, and I feel like a lot of times just in my day-to-day life I find myself being stuck between that patience and vigor, and I feel like kind of just tying back to what you were saying, I feel like a lot of the stuff that's stopping me is like fear of giving in to those raw emotions and like what the outcome is going to be, what the consequences of that would be. And so I don't know, I feel like that's somewhere that I really get stuck too, and not like giving into the vibrancy of just like how I'm feeling. And I feel like concentration would maybe be a good place to go, and I definitely struggle with that too. So
Yeah, I like what you said right there. You said giving in to the vibrancy, something like that. The image that often comes to me is like we have the spark of where we're connecting with people. And that spark, my teacher and I were talking this morning. I told him I got mad at someone and we talked about that a little bit. That spark, we're often working so hard not to create wildfires.
yeah.
Like so much of our effort is just like, hold, like the spark is powerful. We know that, and we know the fear and the power of it. But if we just give into dousing it all the time, then we lose something too.
Yeah.
And we lose that vibrancy, and we get stuck somewhere else. And that actually, oftentimes that burning, I think we oftentimes image it as happening outward, but the burning then just happens inward. Like the flames just ignite our inner being, and we sort of take the brunt of that and pretend it didn't happen. At least that's how it works for me. I go into kind of ignorance mode about it.
Absolutely. And I feel like sometimes I can think back to like past relationships with people where I have really like let the vibrancy take hold, I would say. And that hasn't always worked out very well either. And I feel like there's something really addictive about that, and so finding a balance between the two, like you were talking about, is always really difficult for me, and I feel like I lean to one or the other, and I've definitely been like shying away from the vibrancy lately, I think, because I've had times in my past where I've like gone fully into it and gotten too overwhelmed and absorbed, I would say.
An image that's coming for me is that so we often keep the gates open, and we invite kiddos in the neighborhood. Well, we're inviting them less these days, inviting the kiddos to come back and play here and be here. And so oftentimes I'll be like, I'll be on my time off, which at the temple there's really no time off, but the kids will be back here doing something they shouldn't be. And so my automatic gut response is like, okay, I go out there and I sort of yell at them and tell them to leave, or sort of get them in trouble, or I pretend it didn't happen, which I've done a number of times. It's just like, oh, I didn't see it, I'm not going to deal with this right now. But I think of it as a poverty of imagination and a poverty of trust, really. That what's the difference between going out and be like, okay, there's something to attend to, and then I just walk out and be like, hey guys, what's up? And watch them kind of be like, ah, and see that they want a certain kind of connection. They want to be taken care of, and they recognize they've done something wrong. And at least we have a good enough relationship that that's there. And then I can go from there. I don't have to impose this kind of, this stressed out view on myself. Rather, I can trust the unfolding in the moment and choose to meet it with a kind of, I think you're right on, that requires a kind of concentration, a kind of clarity, but not in a sense of like a rigidity, but like a trust in your gut and willingness to be centered in the situation and not know. Yeah. Were you going to say something, Matthew?
So part of that, like leaning into it, I feel like that toes the line with like indulging anger. And like where as one of the and that's something that I've always had a hard time with. It's like, how do you be present with that and not indulge it?
Yeah.
Because there's a difference between like feeling it and then letting it inform what you do, as opposed to letting it be what you do.
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't know. So,
in the beginning of meditation, the style here, and actually in the school style of meditation is to rock right and left. And first you start with big arcs. And then you get slower, they get smaller and smaller into the center. And then our teacher here, he's just refined his language for this in a way that's really nice. Usually they say, he's like, oh, come to a stop. But now he much more points to it, says, don't come to a stop, just become still, but continue that energy. That you're exploring the right and the left of leaning into this and that. And I think that for me has like an important commentary for this, that we're always leaning one direction or another for the most part, because none of us are fully awakened Buddhas. And so when we find ourselves leaning one way and we feel that, just like without needing to plan anything or be like, okay, I'm over this much, I have to make it to the center, right? Yeah. I have to find the center of skillful means. Just be like, oh, let's lean back the other way. And somewhere, you're like, oh, I passed the center. Oh, that was the center again. That was the center. But if you shoot directly for the center, almost always you're going to be off.
Yeah.
You're going to become rigid somewhere else, and then you're going to hold on to that idea, and eventually you'll be like, oh, I have to relinquish that. But realizing that just relinquishing without so much fear and need to know exactly where that center is, but to develop more of a listening relationship and kind of freedom to make that mistake. Yeah. What is it? The classic Zen saying, the hit, any hit you have for the target for shooting archery is the result of 99 misses.
Mm-hmm.
How else could you hit the bullseye
Yeah.
but miss again and again and again?
Yeah.
I think it might have been Dogen. He talked about his life and he said, "My life has been one continuous mistake." But if you realize it's a mistake, that means somewhere within you is active the feeling of what it could mean to hit the bullseye. So that we're always paying attention to that feedback, and that feedback is not separate from hitting the mark. Yeah. Joshi?
Just come back to your diagram there, and I appreciate the diagram. I'm all about diagrams and like flow chart.
Great.
But just what you were saying there, it feels like those arrows should be going both ways.
Mm-hmm.
Just the
Classic.
trying to find that center between
Yeah.
vigor and patience.
Yeah,
It really needs to be a double-ended arrow or something.
Mhm.
But just random thought there.
Yeah. Another common, actually the most common diagram when someone writes a diagram or writes something out about the paramitas is that wisdom is in the center, connected to all of them. And they're all a direct line to wisdom. So that's a perspective we didn't really talk about here. But actually each one of these is really an opportunity to feel into the fullness of the truth and possibility of a human life. And yeah, it becomes when I think a really important thing that I would love to cultivate from having this class together is like cherishing the small victories of our explorations and our willingness to be brave and have courage. And that when you feel that moment when you've just tossed yourself beyond, like I guess for me it was being angry in the meeting the other day. Like, I guess I never really imagined my life where that could be a kind of victory. But the little ways we can just be constantly exploring, which doesn't mean we have to have it all together. One of the lines that I read, if you can be like this, why worry about not finishing? I think I've spent a long time cultivating an idea of what it would mean to be the good Zen monk guy. We sometimes say the iron monk, and what that would look like. And it was pretty soul crushing. But how to churn in a kind of playfulness for each moment being an opportunity, and relinquishing the idea of our ideas of what a perfect life could look like. But it really takes centering on your mistakes and your own daring, I think. And that puts us at time. Thank you, everyone. So for homework, I'm going to send out all of those, the things that I read this evening, including one more, something called the Hymn to Perfection of Wisdom, which is also read here on a regular basis. And then just the kind of homework over the week, something for everyone to be chewing on, is kind of thinking about what is wisdom? What is this wisdom? How do you image that word? How do you hold it? Where are the ways you are able to know the unfolding or opening of something static or like a closed loop in your life into something more vibrant and energetic? How does that work in your life and your understanding of it? And then next week I'll plan to do a little bit more teaching about kind of fundamental Buddhist teachings around impermanence and no self, and how does that relate with this cultivation of character and this wisdom that we're talking about here. So that's the plan.